Hello, we're going to go together on a mission to discover if you should be using some AI tools when you do platform engineering. For the sake of this discussion, I will be using Aider.Chat, which is really an awesome tool, and I'm exploring it, and you will see with me how that's happening. I will configure it with Claude 3.5 Sonnet, mostly because I already use ChatGPT APIs through GitHub Copilot a lot, personally and at work. So I wanted to try something different, and also because Claude 3.5 has larger context, so maybe that would be helpful. And also I want to see if it has better predictive power when it comes to software development. What is my big picture goal? My big picture goal as somebody who wants to roll out a platform to a big engineering team, I want to start to create starter projects to break the barriers. So my project should allow developers to develop their APIs locally on their machines using Docker Compose. And then when the code is pushed into GitHub, it should be automatically tested. And then if the tests are passing, then it would be packaged and deployed to Google Cloud Run. This is a very simple version. We're not taking any canary, A/B testing scenarios, just simple. And everything should be secured. We should not be running things in the open. And finally, the API should be secured and accessed via Google Apigee. So if you want to build such a starter kit, you have lots of ground to cover. You need to be able to cover software development, whether it's Python, Java, TypeScript, or other languages. You need to be quite comfortable in Docker Compose, and how to use Docker locally and how to build Docker images for deployment. You also want to be comfortable around Git commands and strategies and branching and GitHub Actions, because you're going to do your CI/CD via GitHub Actions. And how do you do a secure CI/CD? And then you also need quite a bit of Google Cloud information. You need to create the Google Cloud Run, you need to create the Apigee API gateway and configure it, and you need to create your artifact registry where you're going to store your Docker containers, and you need to have the proper security and IAM rules around it to ensure that only certain repos and certain users or certain branches sometimes are allowed to push images. Maybe your main branch will be pushing into your prod deployment, and your dev branches will push into dev. So you have a lot to cover. It's a lot of work. Hence, let's try to find out if AI tools can be helpful. So today's goal is simple. I want to create a Google Docker repository of some sort, and I want to create the needed configuration to allow a specific GitHub repository to push images to it. So what do I do? And let me show you when I started this project. When I started this project, I'm going to find the first command. So the first command I created, the first prompt, I was like, and I deliberately wanted to make it generic. I wanted to make it very high level a little bit, so to see what will Aider do for me. So I'm using Aider connected with Cloud Sonnet 3.5. So I wanted to see what it will do. So my first Aider prompt was create a Terraform reusable module that will take a GitHub repository name, GCP project name, GCP location, environment tag, and create all the necessary artifacts to allow the GitHub repo, GitHub Actions to push Docker images into GCP. Despite my English second language formation of the question, it seems to know what I want, and it went and it created this version, the first version. And it's quite interesting to see that it actually went and created an artifact registry repository, which is really neat. It didn't try to create like GCR because that is, deprecated. So it went with the current technology. That's very comforting. But what it did is it created a Google service account and then a member, but then it tried to get a key. So it is trying to use a service key to allow your GitHub repo to push into Google Cloud. And that is not necessarily the way we really want to do it. So what I have done after that is I went and I said, okay, I want you to refactor the code and use workload identity pool. So workload identity pool is the recommended way of doing that authentication instead of service key. And it was pretty neat because it really tried to refactor. And I said, I want you as well to use the attributes to limit it to a specific repository and organization. And then I can show you the results. The results were quite impressive. It went and took away the service key, and then it created actually an identity pool, and it created a provider, and it followed all the correct instructions, and it did get the GitHub issuer URL correctly, and it did some attribute mapping, right? Let me see if I have a previous version. No, I don't have a, yeah, this is the previous version. So it did create the attribute mapping, and it added the actor and repository. So the actor would be the owner or the organization name. The repository, you can get that stuff from GitHub, is going to be the repository name. And that's the issuer URL, and it created an IAM service account. Now, the interesting part is if you want to create that limit, what you want to do really is you want to add an attribute, a condition on the attributes inside your workload identity pool provider. So I went back into my commands, and I said, use work load identity attribute conditions to limit. And when I did that, it was smart enough that it went and it added this line. It added attribute conditions, and it says, I need the attribute repository. I needed the repository to be equal to the parameter that was passed / the parameter org / GitHub repo. And then it would also say the actor ID must start with GitHub org. So it did quite good logic to match the organization and the repo. And that was pretty neat. The fact that it did that, it was pretty neat. But then when it created all that stuff, it created the modules, but it never created the files that use the modules. So I started saying, okay, go and create the files for me. Create the main file and create the TF-var files. And it did that. And then I started managing my parameters, and then I started running Terraform. When I started running Terraform, there was one error that was quite interesting, very interesting. And I took the error and I passed it to it because I said, the error basically said, let me find the error, because some errors were really silly, but one error was really, really interesting. And it said, let me see, the error was that the service API was not enabled. So first, the required project field was not there. So I inserted the error, just grabbed the error, added it, and then it added the project fields in all repositories, which was pretty neat. The other one was the fact that the API, let me see, where is the history? Enabled, let me see. Yep, so this was the error. The error was I couldn't create Google API repository because the Google API for Identity Federation did not exist, and I need to enable it. So when I pasted the error, it went and it says, okay, you know what? I'm going to enable that for you. And the result was that it actually added it into the project. So you can see the API added into your project after that. And then I started running, and then I faced a couple of other small errors, mostly because I did not enable payment on my project. It was a brand new project. And after the Terraform ran, I can actually go and I can see my workload identity federation, and I can see my GitHub Actions pool created, and I can see it is connected to a service account that was created as well. And I can see I have a provider, and if I look at the provider information, you can see it did create the provider, and it actually said, and it actually configured all the attributes I'm going to get, actor ID, repository, and then mapping everything into Google attributes. So now I can use the Google attributes here in the condition common expression language, and it says, and it filled all the variables. So I passed it in my variables, the name of my organization in GitHub and the name of the repository, which we'll probably cover next time. And it says this. So it's looking for an organization called codecreations-io, and the repository name is serverless-api, and the ID, which is the organization, needs to start with codecreations.io. So that was pretty interesting. Like it did quite a good job there. And if I go look at artifacts registry, you're going to see as well that we have an artifact registry created already. So it did create the artifact registry and it's prepared. And then if I look at service accounts, it did create the service account, and it added the permission here that allows it to write into the service registry. So great benefits. I really enjoyed this for a couple of hours playing with it. Not bad at all. It's very super rapid starter project. If you're an engineer, you should be using it, to be honest. The prompt is only helpful if you know the technology. I don't know if I am comfortable. I know that I'm not comfortable at all touching any infrastructure project with prompting if I don't know the technology very well. There's so many places where things can break. Very good news is that it refactors very quickly. Once there is something that you want to change, and you've seen how I changed a couple of times, it will take and it will a code you have, it will add it to its context, and it will make the changes. And it does fix errors, like most errors really, like the project API was not enabled. It did fix it for me. Now, I faced a few issues, okay? Some bugs maybe, and they all come from probably one place. So I'm going to give you an advice. If I try to modify the pre-commit, it would crash because pre-commits was not, if they try to modify the hooks locally, because what Aider does by default is that it tries to commit everything it does. It creates commits and add automatic notes. It's very Git obsessed, if you ask me. Also, will not add Git ignore if you add a new technology. So if you start from a vanilla project, okay, I have a vanilla project, and in my vanilla project, I'm adding .env into the git ignore because in the .env, I have Aider configurations and I have some keys configurations. But if you say add Terraform and you add Terraform code, it will not add the Terraform files that should be ignored into your .git ignore. And then if you prompt it, the worst part is when I prompted and I said, add Terraform files to the .git ignore, it was not complete. It did not add TF vars. So my TF vars were out there in the open. And if it creates TF vars and commits them before you actually do, before you modify or git ignore manually and add them to the .git ignore, they are in your history, and it's very painful to get rid of them in your history. So solution, make sure you do your own .git ignores religiously. Don't depend on it yet for .git ignore. And once in a while it would get lost, okay? Another thing, go into your .env of Aider, and what I did is I disabled the auto commit. That helped me a lot. That gave me a lot of control, what should be added and what should not be added, and managing my .git ignore properly and making sure keys are not there. And it will always ask you to run Terraform init, which, okay, you run it once, you don't have to run it every time. It also wants to run apply. Fine, it wants to run plan. Fine, I can look at plan. I like looking at plans. But it also wants to run apply. And I am not comfortable running Terraform apply after I just finished. I need to review things and spend some time looking at it. So from a platform engineering perspective, don't blindly follow it, all right? I find that was very helpful is to keep your prompt small and create components one by one. It created everything in one place. The way I do it, to be honest, I had to separate things. I wanted to create a separate variables TF. I like to create a separate provider TF file, or maybe I'm too old. I don't know. It seems to put the provider inside the main. I didn't like that. In my mind, I thought artifact registry should be a module, different from all the IAM services, but it created everything in the same place. This is maybe when you get into style, and that's fine. I'm not worried about it. But there are some things that I was not really comfortable with. Avoid large ambiguous sentences like I showed you earlier. If you just say create all the required resources, it may go and like create like something with, service key, something that you should not have been using, to be honest. So you want to avoid that. A few considerations to keep in mind. Cost. The work I did, I spent, I don't know, like from 10 a.m. On a Sunday morning until 2 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. So it's 4 hours with coffee breaks and moving around and experimenting and a lot more prompting than what I'm showing you, right? Like I did a couple of iterations before I showed you that, just so I can get myself comfortable with Aider, because I am new to Aider as well. But there was a cost. The cost for Cloud Sonnet, Cloud 3.5 Sonnet, is around $5 per million tokens. I think I got into 100,000 tokens by the time I kept adding, Terraform files and removing Terraform files. So it cost me half US dollar a day. Jokingly, that's like $1 million Canadian dollar. Big with the exchange rate, of course not. It's probably like 80 cents Canadian or 70 cents Canadian. The cost can add. And if you go and you're not thinking properly and you start loading into your context a large repo without thinking about chunking it properly before you do that, you may get in trouble. I don't know also if you can enable this to your team. So enabling it to a team means, I don't know the mechanics of it. I don't think they got into a GitHub Copilot Enterprise mode yet. Maybe they did, but I looked at it. This tool is amazing if you're short on time. Do not use it if you're short on knowledge. Okay? If there's anything I want to leave you with, the most important thing is this tool is superpower. It's like you have it's like you're doing pair programming with somebody who's really smart, but you cannot do it when you don't have the knowledge, especially when it comes to platforms. Like, I don't know, I see a lot of videos on how to build full stack and how to build games. But if you're looking at real life applications that need to be modified and maintained, and when there is a bug, you will have support teams on the bridge, and you'll have your CIO and CEO calling you in the middle of the night and telling you we lost thousands and maybe millions of dollars in our startup or in our enterprise because of the bug you have. You do not do that with these tools. So it's really good. The final thought I have is, this looks to me like a very early stage at attempting to make prompts something similar into our early attempts of creating, we used to call it 4GL, or like the new generation languages where you just write English and it becomes programs, becomes logic. The problem when it comes to platform, and we will see, I will try next to create the GitHub Actions and the API and the Docker containers, and then try to post, and then finally we'll do the Cloud Run piece, the runtime piece. But when you are touching so many moving parts in a platform, you're not just building logic. You're not just building if then else and loops and repeat until. You are doing something a little bit more complex. Actually doing something a lot more complex. You're not just building an engine, you're building a car. So there's transmission and suspension and frame and brakes and wheels and steering and a ton of things. Engine is probably like the software that runs is probably the engine, but everything around it is what makes that engine useful. So I don't know if we are at that stage yet. I'm gonna stop now. Stay tuned. Next step is we will create a new Python API, run it with Docker locally in our machine, and create the GitHub Actions and do a dummy test, and then try to push that into that container. Stick around, and we'll see what happens.